Rivian made it illegal to drive my car. Here's the story. All right, everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I have an interesting story, kind of an unfortunate story of something I went through with my Rivian, and I'm here to share the information because that's what I do with my YouTube channel. I share my real life experience with the cars that I own, whether it's good or bad, and you can make your own interpretation of what it is and kind of decide whether you want to buy a car based on the experiences I've had. That's what I've done for the last 8 or so years on my YouTube channel, and that's what I plan to continue to do. And today is unfortunately a bad situation I went through with Rivian, and it kind of makes me rethink the entire brand in general. So let me tell you the story here because it's kind of crazy. As many of you know, if you guys have followed along with the channel, I actually took delivery of my Rivian back in the end of July. And I actually had to travel all the way to Denver, Colorado to take delivery. I made a video as to why that is. I'll link it up on the screen today. And I still have more videos to talk about on that entire process and the payment and all that. That will come in the future. I just honestly haven't had a chance to make that video. But when I took delivery, of course, I got my temporary license plate tag and my temporary registration. It was issued by the state of Colorado since that is where I picked up the vehicle. Same kind of story happened with my Challenger when I picked it up back in 2020. I also bought it in Colorado, also had a temporary tag from Colorado. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because the temporary tag had an expiration date, as all temp tags do, of September 20th, 2024. So it was roughly 2 months or so after taking delivery of the vehicle. Now, I distinctly remember when I was signing some of the paperwork in Colorado, the sales advisor told me that, you know, sometimes it gets delayed because of whether that's the Utah DMV, because that's where I live here in Utah, or because of Colorado DMV, who knows, but sometimes it gets delayed. And so, you know, if you see that you're coming up on the expiration date, just call us the day before it expires and we'll, you know, ship overnight a new temporary tag for you to kind of swap out. And that way, you know, it gives you a little bit of extra time. I really didn't think much of it. I honestly didn't even think it was going to hit that point because mostly every car I've ever purchased has always arrived before the temporary tag expiration date. Like, in fact, I almost sometimes like having the temporary tag on there because it makes the car feel new. And then, like, I check the mail 2 weeks after buying the car and the license plate is there. So sometimes I let it, you know, stay on there a little bit longer to kind of have that new car smell type of feeling. But, you know, I figured I would get it before September 20th. So fast forward about a week after taking delivery, and I get this registration title information in the mail regarding having to take my vehicle to my local DMV and having them sign off that they physically inspected the vehicle. I didn't really think too much of it. I figured it was just some sort of typical, you know, DMV bureaucracy process, and really that's what it was. So I went to my DMV pretty much the next day. I had them kind of check off everything, and then I took that paperwork and I FedExed it overnight back to Rivian. So I followed all the rules exactly how they wanted them. Everything was done according to their specifications. So fast forward to the 18th of September, which is 2 days before my expiration date, and I have not received anything in the mail regarding a license plate or permanent registration or anything like that. So I give Rivian a call, and I don't really get a clear answer. All they say is, okay, we're going to escalate this. We're going to contact the title and registration team, and we'll get this thing resolved. Well, I assume just like any other company I usually work with, they usually get things resolved, especially when it's something as simple or trivial as getting just a temp tag extension. So 24 hours go by and I get no updates. So I call back again on the 19th of September and pretty much the same story. They say, you know, we've escalated it. The title and registration team has the information and they're going to make sure that everything gets resolved. Now, at this point, I ask them, can I talk to the title and registration team? Do I even know if a person exists, or is this some automated, you know, chatbot type of thing? Like, can we get in contact with the title and registration team and just explain to them, you know, hear from the horse's mouth that my temp tags expire tomorrow and I can't legally drive after that, right? There is no phone number, apparently, for the title and registration team. Apparently, they're this God almighty team that can't be accessed by anybody, any of us plebes that sit in these Rivians. You know, that we cannot access this team. We can only go through the call center, and only they can access this team or contact this team through some sort of form. I don't even think they can contact this royalty of the title and registration team. I mean, they're completely off limits for all of us peasants. So finally, the 20th arrives, which is the day my registration expires, and I call them again and say, hey guys, by the way, my registration expires today. I don't see any information. So they escalate it again. This is apparently the third time they're escalating an issue that should be pretty easy to resolve. And they finally provide me a tracking number. Now, the tracking number from UPS was great to have, but at the same time, when I would check the tracking number, it said that UPS still hasn't received the package. So I figured, you know what, I'm going to wait until the next day. The 20th was a Friday, I believe. The 21st was a Saturday. I'm like, you know, I'm going to check the next day. Maybe, you know, they'll update the system overnight. So I checked the 21st, and again, UPS says, we don't have your package. There's nothing they can really ship when they don't have the temporary tags in their possession. So I emailed Rivian again and say, hey, they haven't received it. Like, do you have any type of update? Finally, the weekend comes and goes. They essentially made it illegal to drive my car, but it's like, I know the temporary tags are going to be generated. So Monday rolls around and I call Rivian again and I explain the situation. I finally get a hold of somebody who seems like they somewhat care about the issue I'm facing. And they, within about 2 hours, were able to send me an email with my temporary tags. I printed them out, stuck them on my car. It moved the expiration date for my temp tags to November 19th. So for the moment, everything was okay. I knew that by November 19th, I am sure at that point, which would make it August, September, October, almost 4 months since I purchased the vehicle, I'm sure I would get the license plate at that point, right? Now, as it got closer, I realized I should probably reach out to them a little bit more in advance, because what the service advisor told me, which was reach out to them, you know, the night before and they'll overnight it, really isn't reality. That didn't happen. It took me at least 2 or 3 days. In fact, if you count from the 18th when I called them to the 23rd when they provided it, that's 5 days that they were just kind of sitting on it. So this time I'm like, I'm going to do things a little bit differently. So I reached out to them on November 6th because at that time I still didn't have my permanent plates and my Utah registration. So I emailed them November 6th, telling them the situation that I'm in, and 24 hours went by and no response. So I decide to call them on November 7th, and I call them and I explain the situation. They say, oh, yeah, we understand. Great. Yeah, we're going to escalate this. It usually takes, 4 or 5 days for the title and registration team to get back to us. And I said, okay, just make sure that they know that the 19th of November is the expiration date. And, there's nothing that we can do after that deadline unless the team wants to send me another temporary tag extension. But at this point, honestly, I would just like my license plate because it feels like I'm just kicking the can down the road. They said, yeah, we're going to take care of it. Just give us a few days. So I gave them a few days. I believed what they told me. And between November 6th and November 13th, when I called them again, there was no update whatsoever. So I called them again November 13th. I called them multiple times trying to get some details. Long story short, what happened that day was they essentially just escalated it again to the title and registration team. And their response was, via email, I have record of this, that they're doing their best. They're prioritizing everything. They're doing what they can to help you. There was no specific timeline. There was no, hey, by the way, the title and registration team is completed with, so-and-so on X date. They're planning on doing this on so-and-so date. And so by, the 19th of November, you're going to have your plates. There was no detail whatsoever about that. It was simply that, hey, we're working on it. And that's great when it's been maybe a month since I purchased the vehicle, but it's been almost 4 months since I took delivery of this vehicle and you're still working on it. I'm going to go on a rant here and say, considering the fact that the title and registrations team only job, I presume, is to work on title and registration, they're really sucking at their job. I mean, how do you let a vehicle that's gone 4 months without having any type of update or new information or, actually submitting the docs? Now, the reason I know the documents weren't submitted to the state of Utah is because that day I called the state of Utah DMV, which for all things I complain about in Utah, I gotta say the DMV here in Utah is actually pretty top notch. They do a really good job. You don't have to wait in a long line when you go to get your license renewed or whatever. They're pretty efficient. I don't know what happened, but in like the last 10 years, the Utah DMV has really cleaned up house and it works pretty efficiently. So I knew that if the Utah DMV was able to locate it, I would probably get my plates sometime in the next week or two. But when I called the Utah DMV, they told me they had no record of my vehicle or my ownership of this vehicle. I gave them the VIN number, all the information. They said they didn't have it. Now, keep in mind, this is about a week before my registration officially expires. And so if the state of Utah doesn't have this information, after Rivian sat on it for nearly 4 months, it's doubtful that I'm actually going to get my plates within less than a week, right? That's not really, it always takes a little bit of time. Even though the Utah DMV is great, it's still going to take at least 2 weeks for them to process the information, right? So they gave me a good, valuable piece of information, that being that Utah still doesn't have my info. Now, at this point, I called back Rivian. I told them I need to speak to a supervisor. They said, yes, we completely understand. And every time I talk with them, they were all very nice. Honestly, this is not my complaint against the call center. The call center employee folks, they have a hard job because they can't actually connect me with the title and registration team so I can tell the title and registration team the frustrations that I'm witnessing. I'm essentially telling this to the call center folks that I truly believe were on my side. They agreed with me that this was kind of unacceptable, but there's nothing they could do about it. And every time I would call, I would try to get it escalated, and all that would happen was, oh yeah, we're going to connect a supervisor like you requested. They're going to reach out to you in 48 hours. So, because for some reason, these supervisors are so busy that it takes them 48 hours to respond to a request about a pretty urgent issue. So I ended the day on the 13th, sending the Rivian an email saying, there's a few options for you. One, you make sure you get this done by the 18th, which is sounding unlikely given the Utah DMV doesn't even have the info. 2, you provide me a rental vehicle so that I can legally drive around in my car. 3, you can send me another temporary tag extension. Or 4, you prorate my monthly payments for the amount of days I can't drive this vehicle. That's kind of where I left it. And the answer was that they can't give me another temporary tag extension. I don't really understand why. I don't know if it's a Rivian policy. That's what they initially told me. And then I heard maybe the state of Colorado limits the ability of having multiple temporary tag extensions, which makes sense. So I don't know what the truth is here, but the fact was that they couldn't get me a temporary tag extension, another one. They couldn't get me the license plates realistically by the 19th because the state of Utah hadn't had them. So the 2 options that I was seeing was rental car or prorating my payment. Now that's pretty much where the conversation left off on the 13th. I was waiting for the supervisor to call me back. And at the same time, I was starting to engage the Utah DMV Enforcement Division. So I didn't know about this, and this is probably good information for everybody to know. But apparently every single state has this DMV Enforcement Division, which I can only picture it as a bunch of buff dudes wearing brass knuckles that are coming into dealerships and kicking the you-know-what out of the dealerships. I'm exaggerating here, but it is a division that essentially makes sure that everything is fair and honest. So if you had something stolen from you from a dealership, or if they committed some sort of fraud or, issues with title and registration like what I'm facing, they come in and they kind of work with the dealership. They might fine them. They might revoke their license, right? It's a check and balance on making sure the dealerships do a good job. But I contacted the Utah DMV Enforcement Division, and I ended up getting an update that essentially there's not much they can do because the vehicle was purchased in Colorado, which really wasn't good news. That being said, the Utah DMV did contact Rivian, and they had a conversation with them about the situation. And what the Utah DMV Enforcement Division told me was that they're actively working on this. They're figuring out if they want to, or if they can get you a rental car for this time period. So it made me feel at least that they're doing something because they've told the Utah DMV. And at the same time, it probably also scared Rivian a little bit knowing that the Utah DMV is somewhat involved because just a little bit of background here, leasing just opened up in Utah pretty much days before I leased my vehicle in Colorado. But obviously it being registered in Utah, it had to be open in Utah as well. And so it's a very new thing for Rivian. I'm sure they don't want to lose any type of leasing privileges. And I'm not sure if that would even happen considering the fact that I bought the car in Colorado. But regardless, I'm sure it's a little bit worrisome when the Utah DMV is calling you versus a customer calling you complaining. So I was hoping that kind of, stirred the pot a little bit. And what happened was November 19th came and went, and I didn't have my registration. It didn't come in. There was no update from Rivian. Keep in mind, up to this point, I did not get any type of call from a supervisor that they said would happen within 48 hours. It didn't. I also texted the service center that I purchased the vehicle from. They said, yeah, we're going to look into it. And then crickets. There was no response. I followed up with them via text, no response. I even called the number, and it went to a central call center that kind of distributes any type of service center work to your local service center. So there was nobody that I could actually contact to say, hey, let's stay on the line here and figure this out, because the title and registration team is a God almighty team that doesn't have a phone number. The call center can only do so much with escalations, or maybe they only want to do so much in terms of escalations. I can't get a supervisor to call me. I can't even go into a physical dealership and grab somebody by the collar and say, hey, you got to help me out here because I can't legally drive my car. So I felt really helpless at the time, to be honest. And it kind of made me wish I had a traditional dealership type model, as crazy as that sounds, because at least at that point, I can show up at the dealership and talk to somebody. No matter how virtual we get and how advanced we get, there's something different about going face to face with somebody and them seeing your frustrations than simply talking to somebody on the phone that's, thousands of miles away, that there's really nothing you can do. And so I really started to regret my decision with the Rivian. And even to this day, it's still a little bit sour. But let me get back to the story. So November 19th comes and goes. There's no response from Rivian. And so finally November 20th, when I legally can't drive the car, there's no extensions, there's no rental car provided by them, there's no prorating of payment. Like, I'm literally just, if I get a ticket, in fact, the Utah DMV Enforcement Division told me this, if I get a ticket, I'm kind of screwed. She said that I could maybe pursue some sort of civil litigation with Rivian, but let's be real here. I mean, Rivian is still a much larger company than I am. They're going to have much stronger lawyers than I am, and it's going to take a long process. It's going to cost me more money than the ticket itself. So I'm kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. There's not much I can actually do to fix the situation. I just have to hope that I don't get pulled over, or I have to take a different vehicle like the Challenger, but it's a little bit hard to do when it's the middle of winter. Or I have to take public transportation. And so finally, I ended up going to work in a different vehicle, and I call them on the way and I say, look, the registration's expired. I need to speak to a supervisor right now. And they give me the runaround again. The supervisor's really busy because it's 8 in the morning, and I'm sure they're really busy. They said they're going to call me back in 20 minutes. At this time, I started engaging the Colorado Enforcement Division because I'm like, well, maybe somebody can light a fire under their butt if the Utah DMV didn't. In that time period, as I'm talking to the Colorado DMV, I get a phone call from Rivian. And finally, after asking for a supervisor for weeks at this point, I am speaking with a supervisor. They actually exist. I mean, this isn't just some fairy tale of a supervisor existing. They're actual human bodies that call themselves supervisors. And to their credit, the 3 supervisors I was speaking with were very attentive. It was the kind of customer service that I honestly expected from Rivian, or really from anybody who's dealing with a customer that's kind of in a crappy situation. They were very quick to say, you know what, as soon as the title and registration team come online, because they come online a few hours later, because of course, why should they work the regular work hours anybody else works? They're God Almighty. They get to work a shortened schedule. So anyways, they said that as soon as they open up, we can contact them. I'm going to give you an update today. And I said, I've been hearing about this for a while now, that Rivian's going to give me a call back and give me an update, and it just hasn't happened. I mean, I can trace all the phone calls. It's always been from me. This is the first time anybody from Rivian has ever called me. I said, I know, I completely understand. It's a very crappy situation, but I promise you we're going to call you back. If not, call the number, ask for my name. And I wrote down all their names. And then what's funny is I think they were a little bit spooked at this point, because he even said, my shift is ending, but I have the other shift supervisor right here. Do you want to talk to her? It's like he knew that my understanding was they didn't even exist. This was some sort of lore, a fairy tale of a position. And so I spoke with the incoming supervisor that's taking over the shift, and she's actually the one that helped me the most. So anyway, a few hours go by, and I wasn't sure if I would get an update. But finally, I get a phone call from this new shift supervisor, and she explains that everything from the state of Utah has been submitted, received, approved, accepted, whatever the language is, and that the license plate is on its way to Rivian as we speak. So this is the 20th of November. She said, as soon as we get this license plate, we're going to FedEx it to you overnight. So, best case scenario, you're probably going to get it tomorrow, which would be the 21st. I said, I believe you, but I also don't, because hasn't been the case in my entire experience with Rivian. And, a few hours go by, and I do get an email with a tracking number, and it does show that the package has been picked up and it's on its way to my house the next day. And lo and behold, the 21st comes and the license plate delivers to my house. So finally, I was able to legally drive my car the next day to work after about a 1 or 2 day rift where I couldn't legally drive it, and I had to figure out driving a different car and taking public transportation. And Rivian, to their credit, did say that they would reimburse me for any public transportation I took, but let's be real here. The cost of a Rivian per day is more than taking public transport, right? Like, I would love to take public transport more, but I'm a car enthusiast and I'm an idiot and I spend more money on cars. And so for me, it honestly would make more sense for them to prorate my monthly payment, because that's worth more to me than like a $2 ticket for a bus pass or a light rail track station that we have here locally. So I didn't end up submitting any receipts, but they were, very apologetic at that point. But honestly, at that point, I didn't care. Never in my life have I been so happy to see license plates. So that's my long story about a very frustrating experience where Rivian made it illegal to drive my car that I'm making monthly payments on. A very messed up story and something that I've never before experienced in any other vehicle I've owned. I've, as you've seen on the channel, owned, half a dozen different vehicles, bought new, used, leased, different states, etc. I've never had this experience. And in my opinion, this is a much easier issue to resolve than any other issues that can come up on a car. Like, this makes me worry. What happens if I have a big catastrophic failure with the vehicle? Let's say my vehicle just stops driving. How long is it going to take to get that issue resolved? And clearly Rivian isn't prioritizing getting somebody a loaner car or figuring out this. They're going to wait until the very last minute. And that really frustrates me. And it's not something that a business should be doing. If you can't even handle the simplest tasks, you really shouldn't be in business. Now, don't get me wrong. The product itself, the Rivian R1T that I own, is one of, if not the best vehicle I've ever owned, period. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't have any issues, right? There are some creaks that I want fixed, and there's some stuff I've talked about in other videos, but overall, big picture, I'm a picky person, but big picture, this is a phenomenal vehicle, and I love it. Every time I get in the garage, I want to drive this thing. It's just smooth, it's powerful. I'm going to make more videos about this, but it's a phenomenal product. But as a company, Rivian has a long way to go. It's a very disappointing experience, and I want to spread the word to all of you because I don't know if I can actually recommend buying a new or used Rivian because the company itself doesn't provide the type of customer support that you would expect from a vehicle that's $70,000, $80,000, $90,000. It doesn't line up. In fact, none of this experience would line up to any new car. I mean, if I bought a new Nissan Versa, the cheapest car on the planet, right? If I have an issue with it, I can simply go to a dealer and I'm expecting that maybe things will get resolved. Here, I was kind of stuck in no man's land. I was just talking to, somebody on the other line through a phone. So it's a frustrating experience. I want to share it with you all. And if this convinces you not to buy a Rivian, honestly, I don't blame you. I have not had a good experience. And this isn't the first time that I've had a bad experience with Rivian. Prior to this, I had issues where I couldn't get the money factor for my lease from Rivian. It took me kind of fighting the sales advisor to let them know what my interest rate is on my lease, which is not something I've ever experienced on any other car. I also had some insurance disagreements with Rivian when I first took delivery of this car, or I should say before I took delivery, because they were making me put insurance on this car before I actually legally had possession of it. It was very weird, and I'll talk about it in my monthly payment for this vehicle video, but just not a great experience. Let me know in the comments below if you guys have had a better experience with Rivian and where you're located, because I do think maybe that makes a difference. Maybe if I was in Colorado, maybe things would be easier. Maybe I would get the registration a lot quicker. Maybe because they just opened in Utah, and to my understanding, they use like a third-party service to handle the title and registration, which again makes me wonder what in the world does the title and registration team at Rivian actually do, but that's a topic for a different video. Maybe because they just opened in Utah, this all was just luck of the draw. I was one of the first, and I was kind of in a crappy situation. I wanted to share that with all of you. I hope you guys enjoyed, or at least found this video informative. If you guys did enjoy this video, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for all of the weekly car videos. Also, check me out on all the social media, same as the YouTube channel name. And until next time, everybody, I hope you stay schwazy, stay healthy, have a wonderful day, and be cautious of Rivian as a company.